Mr. President.
The senator from Iowa.
Today, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle voted to block consideration of the Justice Bill. This happens to be the first major piece of police reform legislation in years. To be clear, this vote wasn't a vote to pass the bill in the Senate. It wasn't even a vote to limit debate on police reform. It was a vote to whether we could simply begin debate on police reform. We're standing now on the floor of what's called the world's greatest deliberative body, the United States Senate. And yet my colleagues on the other side wouldn't even entertain a debate on an issue that has stirred our nation and shaken it to its core. We know why we're here. There was a murder of a citizen in Minneapolis, George Ford. There's been peaceful demonstrations all over the country since then. And Congress is trying to respond, should have responded years ago, but this has brought it to a head that we need police reform. Yes, we're in the world's greatest deliberative body, we're told. The Senate's legacy and prestige is built on our ability to debate and discuss legislation to address the most pressing issues before our country. My colleagues on the other side have robbed the American people of the opportunity to pass meaningful police reform. Now, on the other side, they argue that the Justice Act doesn't go far enough and that their version of police reform is the only bill worth considering. You know, all the brains in the United States Senate are on the other side of the aisle, more or less what they're saying. I want to remind them that we live in a country with diverse ideas and varying opinions. Debating those differences is the only way to make meaningful reforms. Now, Democrats complained that their views weren't represented in this bill. Well, the Justice Act contained a number of proposals that actually have bipartisan support. And even if that wasn't enough for them, every Democrat would still have an opportunity to make additional changes. Now, on our side, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina led this effort for all of us. 46 of us are joining him. I hope the other 7 will join in as well. But that's just Republicans. And this is a bipartisan bill. Presumably not big enough bipartisan to satisfy the other side, but still bipartisan. And they wouldn't let us move ahead. But Senator Scott made clear when the bill was introduced, that's Monday, no, it was last week, was interested and willing to discuss changes. Leader McConnell pledged an open amendment process. Even Speaker Pelosi noted that she welcomes the opportunity to conference the Democrat House police reform bill with Senator Scott's Justice Act. But instead of letting our time-honored legislative process work, my colleagues sent a letter calling the Justice Act unsalvageable. Let's remember, these are the same senators who insisted that the Senate consider a police reform bill before the July recess, which starts next week. But now that they're getting what they asked for, They say they don't want it anymore. At least that's what their vote tells me today. So my question is, what are they afraid of? Are they afraid of losing control of the process if it goes to a vote? Well, then they're afraid of democracy. They're afraid of the American people who elected each senator in this body and trusted each senator to represent them by voting on legislation. Are they afraid that their ideas won't be adopted? The Justice Act has many similarities to the Justice and Policing Act. We want to find a way forward on a bipartisan basis. If ideas have merit, they will have to be voted on and be included. Are they somehow afraid that if we make progress, it will be perceived as giving the president and his party a win? I've been around here long enough to know that in an election year, it gets harder and harder to get things done because neither party wants the other to get any credit for anything or have an advantage. But on an issue as important as this, it's the height of cynicism and hypocrisy to prevent progress to gain political advantage. But I'm reminded of a scripture, quote, "For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world but lose his soul?" End of quote. The American people expect better. I know that my fellow Iowans expect better. Frankly, I expect better as well. I hope my colleagues reconsider their obstruction and let us get on with crafting a bipartisan police reform bill. I know my colleagues on the other side share our desire to deliver for our constituents. I don't doubt their sincerity about wanting to address inequities in the communities or unfairness in policing. I don't doubt they have legitimate ideas on how to improve this legislation if it had come before the United States Senate. But at the very least, we can't accomplish any of those things unless you start debate. We've done it before on other issues. Only 18 months ago, this chamber passed the First Step Act, the most significant criminal justice reform bill in a generation. That was a strong bipartisan bill. It wasn't easy, but Senator Durbin and I and Democrats and other Republicans, in addition to the two of us, we found a path forward and are giving thousands of Americans a chance to improve their lives when they leave prison. I'm frustrated that the Senate can't consider this Justice Act, but I promise Iowans and the American people that this partisan exercise doesn't represent my last hope for meaningful change. I stand ready to work with any Democrat or any Republican on the issue of police reform, and for sure, I am not alone in the willingness to do that. In fact, at the Judiciary Committee just last week, the issue was police use of force in community relations. At that meeting, Chairman Graham indicated that he wants to hold more hearings on this issue. So I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to not let today's vote be the end of the story. There is and has been an evergreen issue. George Floyd's murder was a spark that ignited a national outcry. We must rise to the occasion. We cannot let election year politics and differences of opinion prevent us from even discussing how best to improve justice and safety in our community.